The story of the Argonians begins far away from the cold stone of Skyrim and deep within the breathing heart of Black Marsh, a land unlike any other in Tamriel, where the ground never truly sits still and the air seems to hum with ancient whispers carried through swamps older than recorded history. To understand the Argonians is to understand a people shaped not just by the mud and the mist, but by a living force that lies beneath it all. The Hist trees so ancient and so aware that they have watched eras rise and fall like ripples on dark water. Every Argonian, from the smallest hatchling to the most weathered warrior, carries a piece of the Hist within them, a connection threaded through their veins like a soft current, guiding their instincts and memories in ways few outsiders ever comprehend. Their entire existence is tied not to empire or conquest, but to rhythm and survival, molded by marshes where sunlight rarely pierces the canopy and where the ground can swallow an unwary traveler whole. In this place of shifting bogs and quiet mirages, Argonians learn to move silently, to fight fiercely, and to rebuild endlessly after disaster, emerging each time with a resilience that feels as natural to them as breathing. Even their birth is shaped by the Hist, as sap dreams mingle with the soul of a hatchling, granting glimpses of futures, warnings of dangers, and faint echoes of past lives long dissolved into the swamp's memory. Scholars often debate whether Argonians are born as individuals or as extensions of the Hist's will, but Argonians themselves make no such distinction. To them, the trees are kin, the water is teacher, and the marsh is home in the truest sense. Their scales shift color with age and experience, reflecting seasons of hardship or peace, and their bodies adapt with uncanny ease to the world around them, lungs adjusting to murky depths, skin toughening against harsh climates, instincts sharpening when danger stirs. And yet, for all their alien grace, Argonians carry a quiet gentleness, a capacity for stillness born from a lifetime listening to the slow heartbeat of the Hist. When they journey far from Black Marsh, even to places as cold and jagged as Skyrim, they bring with them those soft echoes of the swamp, a calm patience, an understanding of cycles, and an awareness that time moves differently for those shaped by ancient roots. They walk through the world as if every shadow holds a memory, and every gust of wind carries advice, as though the Hist whispers guidance no matter how far they roam. And as Skyrim's snowy roads crunch beneath their feet, their hearts remain tethered to that distant, humid cradle where visions bloom from tree sap and destiny grows from roots that remember the world long before anyone else could speak its name. The deeper you travel into the world of the Argonians, the more you begin to realize that their story is not written in ink or stone the way most races preserve their past, but in the shifting rhythms of the marshlands, in the pulse of the Hist, and in the quiet resilience of a people shaped by mysteries far older than Tamriel itself. Their history moves like water through reed grass, never fully still, always flowing into the next change. And to understand them is to follow the currents of a civilization that has survived by listening to the whispers of their world. Long before the rise of the empire or the spread of the divine's influence, the Argonians existed as something closer to a memory than a nation, a species woven into the roots of an ancient consciousness that guided them through ages where most other cultures would have vanished. The Hist watched the world unfold through endless seasons, and in its silent regard, the Argonians learned what it meant to survive, not through power or wealth, but through patience, intuition, and the knowledge that every living thing carries strength in its ability to adapt. When the first explorers stepped into the borders of Black Marsh, they described seeing a land that felt alive in ways they could not fully comprehend. The trees seemed to lean closer when strangers passed, their leaves trembling as though whispering through the swamp's heavy fog. The water reflected not just shapes and shadows, but movements too smooth to be wind, too deliberate to be chance. Those early travelers wrote in their journals that the Argonians walked with the ease of people who knew the marsh was listening, as if every step they took was part of a conversation between themselves and the land. Others wrote that the swamp seemed to shift when Argonians approached, forming paths where none existed moments before, as if the land itself recognized them. Some imperial scholars dismissed these claims as emotional exaggerations, but the marsh never bothered to explain itself. It simply existed in a state of quiet awareness, and the Argonians continued to move through it with the same fluid grace they had carried for millennia. The relationship between Argonians and the Hist remains one of the most extraordinary bonds in the entire Elder Scrolls universe. Scholars debate whether the Hist are merely trees with extraordinary sap, or something deeper, something closer to a cosmic intelligence that exists across timelines and dreams. To the Argonians, such debates are unnecessary. They know the truth through experience, not speculation. The Hist speaks in sensations, emotions, and visions that drift through the mind like half-remembered dreams. When an Argonian is born, they are bathed in the sap that binds them to the tree, giving them a connection that remains throughout their entire life. That connection shapes their identity, their instinct, even their physical form. The Hist may not guide them with commands, but with impressions, feelings of caution, glimpses of danger, sudden certainty, or quiet encouragement. Where other races seek purpose through prophecy or religion, Argonians find it through the gentle pull of something ancient that lives beneath the surface of all things. For countless ages, the Argonians were misunderstood by outsiders. Other civilizations saw their unfamiliar mannerisms and unusual physiology and interpreted them as primitive or simple. But the truth was that their knowledge existed in different forms, less visible but far more profound. They understood the cycles of nature with an intimacy unmatched by any scholar. They recognized the subtlest changes in weather long before they manifested. They could navigate through swamps thick enough to swallow entire caravans without leaving so much as a footprint. They knew which herbs could heal wounds others considered fatal, which creatures posed real danger, and which were simply misunderstood. Their society was not defined by towering architecture or decorative grandeur, but by a living symmetry with their environment. Every structure they built, every tool they crafted, and every ritual they practiced flowed from their unity with the world around them. The marshlands were always a refuge for them, a place that embraced its people with protective hostility toward outsiders. To walk through Black Marsh without the Hist's quiet blessing was to step into a labyrinth of toxic rivers, venomous creatures, and terrain engineered by nature itself to reject invaders. Even the most disciplined imperial legions struggled to maintain presence in the region. Records describe men vanishing into fog as though the swamp swallowed them whole. Forts decayed twice as fast as their counterparts elsewhere, wooden beams rotting in months, stone walls cracking in weeks. Diseases that had no name in Cyrodiil spread through encampments with eerie precision, sparing no one. Argonians, however, thrived effortlessly in the same conditions, walking through fever, mists unharmed, navigating waters filled with unseen threats as though guided by an invisible hand. It was not luck, it was belonging. Through generations of conflict, slavery, and foreign invasion attempts, the Argonians continued to endure, and in their endurance, they changed. The Hist had always shaped them subtly, like a sculptor smoothing clay, but during times of crisis, it acted with more deliberate intention. When the Dunmer enslaved their people, tearing them from their homeland and forcing them into chains, The Hist felt the loss as deeply as any Argonian. The trees do not forget. When the Oblivion crisis erupted and gates opened across Tamriel, Argonians did not cower. The Hist beckoned them home, calling warriors from lands far and wide to converge upon Black Marsh. Those who answered felt something ignite within them, a ferocity born not from anger but from purpose. They poured into Oblivion gates with a rage that stunned even the Daedra. Some Daedric commanders supposedly sealed their own gates to stop the flood of warriors they could not control. When the crisis finally ended, Black Marsh emerged stronger than before, united by a collective understanding of what they had survived together. The Argonian people changed again after the crisis, their society shifting into patterns outsiders could not understand. Their unity grew sharper, more deliberate. Some scholars believe the Hist remembered something from the Oblivion crisis that influenced its guidance, shaping the Argonians into a more coordinated and self-assured civilization. They rebuilt their towns with new structures that seemed grown rather than constructed, twisting in organic patterns that made navigating them impossible for invaders but instinctive for locals. Their tribes communicated more closely than before, moving like parts of one organism responding to a shared pulse. Little of this is written down because Argonians do not preserve their history through parchment, but through memory and ritual. Their elders carry stories in their hearts, retelling them in the form of soft chants sung beneath moonlight, or quiet tales whispered to hatchlings nestled near the roots of the Hist. Outsiders rarely hear these stories, not because Argonians hide them, but because the stories themselves are alive, shaped by shared experience rather than rigid fact. To understand their past, one must sit beneath the branches of the Hist, listen to the marsh breathing, and let the story drift through the senses like sap thinning in warm sunlight. Argonian spirituality also takes forms unlike anything found in other cultures. They do not worship the divines in the same structured ways as the Empire, nor do they practice Daedric devotion with the fervor found in Morrowind. Instead, their reverence centers on the Hist and the natural world. They see spirits in the movement of water, wisdom in the path of migrating insects, and guidance in the rhythmic croak of marsh creatures at dusk. Their shamans do not deliver sermons, but interpretations of what the Hist wishes their people to understand. Sometimes these interpretations appear vague, but they carry weight that echoes through the lives of every Argonian who listens. Even their names reflect this fluidity. While many Argonians use traditionally structured names when traveling abroad, within their homeland, they often hold descriptive names based on personality, achievements, or traits recognized by their tribe. These names shift with time, maturing as the individual does. A hatchling might begin life with one name and grow into another as they develop identity and purpose. It is a gentle reminder that life itself is a process of becoming, not a static title assigned once and kept forever. Throughout their long history, the Argonians have often been underestimated, dismissed as reclusive or primitive. Yet, quietly, without seeking recognition or dominance, they have built a civilization that endures catastrophes, outlasts empires, and weathers the shifting tides of Tamriel's politics. Their strength lies not in conquest but in patience, not in wealth but in adaptability. To the Argonians, survival is not merely a struggle, it is a dance, a relationship with the world in which each step is guided by forces older than memory, older even than the mortal plane itself. And when you walk the swamp paths at night, whether in truth or simply in wandering imagination, you might feel what they feel, the soft glow of insect lanterns drifting across dark water, the deep hum of the Hist resonating through your bones, the warm, humid air carrying the scent of moss and earth, the faint impression that the land knows your presence. You might sense, in the quiet spaces between your breaths, the patience of a people shaped by a world that moves slowly, deliberately, deeply. For the Argonians, life is neither conquest nor ambition. It is belonging. It is listening. It is understanding that the world speaks in ways most never learn to hear. And in that quiet, gentle knowledge, they continue to thrive, forever intertwined with the ancient roots that shaped them. The deeper history of the Argonians stretches through shadows and water like a memory half buried beneath silt, resurfacing in soft fragments that never reveal themselves all at once. Their story is less a timeline and more a current, drifting slowly through ages, shaped not by empires or kings, but by the relentless pulse of the Hist. While other civilizations carved monuments to the sky, the Argonians built their world downward and inward, letting roots, rivers, and ancient instincts guide them rather than stone walls or written doctrine. Each generation seems to move as if listening to something beneath the threshold of hearing, something old enough to remember the first dawnlight over Nirn. To understand their lore is to understand the way history feels when it's alive, breathing, and constantly reshaping itself beneath the trees of Black Marsh. Long ago, before the rise of the races who would later dominate the continent, Black Marsh was a realm ruled by beings far beyond the understanding of mortals. Some texts whisper of the faceless, formless precursors called the perverse tribes or the root men, strange entities that lived before even the Hist fully awoke. These ancient shapes moved like fluid shadows, evolving into strange variants that vanished into the deepest bogs long before man or Mer ever heard the word marsh. Scholars debate whether the Argonians are descendants of such ancient creatures or whether the Hist merely absorbed fragments of their essence the same way a tree absorbs memories through its roots. Whatever the truth, the Argonians emerged as the only people able to adapt completely to the marsh's mysterious past, shaped not by conquest, but by the land's quiet will. Argonians often describe their early histories not in terms of events, but in sensations. They speak of eras as great rains, or warm fogs, or seasons of slow-growing light. They talk of the age of crust and scale, when the marshes themselves seemed to thicken with power, when the soil steamed with hidden knowledge. They describe the time of shallow waking, when the Hist began to reach outward to teach them the rhythms of life and death. While other cultures fix their origin stories in singular acts or divine interventions, Argonians view their beginning as a gradual blossoming, like the slow unfurling of a leaf in spring. They were formed not in a moment but over countless lifetimes of listening. The most defining element of their lore has always been the Hist, a species of trees so ancient that they predate the usual reckoning of time itself. The Hist are not gods in the traditional sense, nor simple flora. They are something between memory and flesh, a consciousness spread through roots and sap, communicating in ways that transcend speech. Argonians are bonded to them from birth through ritual ingestion of the sap, but deeper connections appear to arise from something innate, something woven into their very marrow. Some who study the Argonians remark that the Hist seem to have shaped their people deliberately, forming an adaptive species capable of surviving the harshest environments. The link between them is so profound that it blurs the boundaries of identity. Where the Argonian ends and the Hist begins is a question no scholar has ever answered. Legends from the marsh hint that the Hist once communicated with many different races, not only Argonians, but over time, their voices fell silent to the outside world, retreating into their own ancient mind. It was then that the Argonians moved from being simply residents of the marsh to custodians of it, chosen guardians who understood that their purpose was tied to the survival of something larger than themselves. The Hist did not demand worship, but partnership, a harmony that became the backbone of the Argonian worldview. While men and Mer conquered, mined, and reshaped their land, Argonians built their society on cooperation with nature's will. Even their settlements resemble a conversation between structure and environment, built from materials that can be reclaimed by the swamp without leaving scars. One of the most intriguing aspects of Argonian lore is their vision of time itself. To them, history is not a straight line, but a shifting pool. They believe that memory exists not only in minds, but in the land. A swamp remembers, the water remembers, the roots remember. An Argonian walking through the marsh is surrounded by silent voices, footsteps left by ancestors who moved the same way, breathed the same air, and slept in the same humid warmth. The Hist use this living memory to guide their people, sending impressions, sensations, and strange dreams into their minds. There are stories of hatchlings swimming through the roots and emerging knowing things no one ever taught them, rituals, instincts, warnings, or prophecies that feel older than language itself. Their connection to the natural world also extends to death. While most cultures mourn as if something has been lost forever, Argonians see death as another phase in the great cycle. Souls sink back into the Hist, carried like rainwater returning to a lake. The dead are not gone, they are diffused, transformed, existing in a more fluid state. This belief is why Argonians often appear less distraught by loss than their neighbors. They don't see death as an ending, but as a return, a dissolving into something ancient and comforting. For them, grief is softened by the knowledge that no one truly leaves the Hist behind. Argonian society has always been shaped by the unpredictability of Black Marsh, a land that shifts underfoot and refuses to be tamed. The tribes adapt to challenges rather than forcing the world to change for them. Each tribe has its own customs, shaped by the particular murmurs of the history to which it is bonded. Some tribes lean toward warrior traditions, their sap tinted with fiery impulses that stir bravery and aggression. Others embrace healing, crafting balms and rituals that blend natural herbs with Hist-given knowledge. A few tribes remain hidden deep within the swamp, unconcerned with the outside world, content to live in symbiosis with the marsh and its ancient rhythms. The Argonians' ability to alter their physiology in response to the Hist's guidance is one of the most mysterious aspects of their lore. Depending on the sap they consume during certain rites, they can develop different traits, stronger limbs, sharper senses, heightened resistance to disease, or even unique markings on their scales. These transformations often appear during their hatching or as a result of ritual maturity ceremonies. Outsiders sometimes call them shapeshifters, but the truth is more subtle. Argonians are not changing themselves. They are allowing the Hist to select traits suited for the life the tree foresees for them. Their bodies become expressions of ancient intention, shaped not by random mutation, but by a wisdom older than the world. Foreign scholars have long been perplexed by the fact that Argonians born outside Black Marsh often lack the resilience and innate connection of those hatched within its borders. Without the Hist's guidance in their earliest moments of life, these Argonians grow differently, sometimes adopting customs of the cultures that raised them. But despite physical changes, many of them eventually feel called to return to the marsh. Stories abound of Argonians raised in distant lands, suddenly dreaming of distant swamps, hearing songs carried by water they've never touched. When they finally return, the Hist welcomes them with a familiarity that borders on parental recognition. It's as if the trees have been waiting for wandering children to come home. The Argonians' relationship with outsiders has always been unpredictable. They are capable of profound kindness and equally capable of terrifying ferocity when defending their homes. Much of Tamriel struggles to understand them because the Hist guidance makes their motivations appear alien. Argonians don't build empires or value gold. They don't seek conquest or dominion. They act when the Hist calls for action, fight when the Hist calls for war, and retreat when the Hist urges quiet. This fluid loyalty leads outsiders to misinterpret them as inscrutable or inconsistent, but Argonians see themselves as simply responding to the needs of a much larger consciousness. They aren't unpredictable, they're attuned to a world others can't hear. One of the most defining events in their history is the Oblivion Crisis, a moment when the Hist spoke with urgency not heard in ages. During this time, the Hist awakened their people to resist the Daedric invasion with a fury that scholars still struggle to explain. Argonian warriors stormed the Oblivion Gates with such ferocity that even the Daedra retreated from them. Outsiders called it supernatural, impossible, yet the Argonians felt no surprise. They believed the Hist had guided them through countless ancestral memories of war, shaping them into protectors, not only of their land, but of their destiny. To them, the battle was not bravery, but instinct, a response to a threat the marsh itself recognized. The quieter parts of Argonian lore describe their world through metaphors of water. They see life as a journey through a great river where currents guide, shape, and sometimes overwhelm travelers. They believe a person's spirit flows like a stream, sometimes gentle, sometimes overflowing. Choices ripple through generations, merging with the lives of others like tributaries joining a greater body. Even their songs flow in patterns that mirror the slow pulse of the swamp, rising and falling like waves washed by memory. To understand an Argonian is to understand the sound of dripping water, the sway of reeds in a slow breeze, and the shifting patience of a wetland that consumes and nurtures in equal measure. The rituals they practice often involve immersion in swamp pools or meditation beneath the canopy of colossal trees. Some rites require silence, others singing in deep, resonant tones that vibrate through roots and bark. Argonians don't always explain the purpose of their rituals to outsiders, partly because many of their customs aren't learned through logic but through sensation. They feel their history rather than study it, experiencing the stories of their ancestors as gentle murmurs rising through humid air and shimmering water. Each ritual becomes a dialogue with the past, a soft conversation carried by the sap of living memory. Even their myths are fluid, shifting through retellings like reflections in rippling pools. One version of a story might portray a hero as a serpent-like warrior guided by moonlight, while another version may describe the same hero as a humble healer wandering the marshes with a lantern of bioluminescent moss. To Argonians, both stories are true because truth is not a fixed point, but a living shape. They allow contradictory tales to coexist, believing that each carries a piece of the greater meaning. In the stillness of Black Marsh, time feels slow, like a long inhale held in anticipation of something ancient awakening. Argonian lore is filled with prophecies whispered through generations, visions not of conquest, but of harmony, healing, and the quiet guardianship of lands most outsiders fear. Their histories wrap around themselves like vines, twisting through centuries of shadowed swamps and forgotten wars. And as you listen to the soft, drifting stories carried by the roots of the Hist, it becomes clear that the Argonians are not just a people. They are a continuation of something older, a harmony between life and memory, shaped gently by the world they vowed to protect. The Argonians' connection to shadows runs deeper than stealth or survival. It is a quiet instinct carried in their blood, a memory of ages when the deepest corners of Black Marsh were the only sanctuary from the horrors that roamed through its mists. Long before they learned to shape huts or carve tools from root and bark, Argonians learned to listen to darkness as though it were a living ally, reading the rhythm of insects, the patterns of falling dew, and the subtle movements of predators whose shapes blurred with the night. This instinct passed into their culture so naturally that an Argonian child learns to read silence the way others learn to read words, understanding that the marsh teaches through what it hides as much as through what it reveals. The Hist sharpened this awareness, threading a second sense into the minds of their people, an intuition that can feel danger before it speaks, and guidance before it's offered. Argonians who train under this instinct move like water flowing around obstacles, slipping through vines, smoke, and moonlight with an ease that feels almost supernatural. In the ancient tribes, shadow scouts carried messages between villages under the cover of storms, their forms blending into the rain like silhouettes caught between flashes of lightning. Their legends say that on certain nights, when the mist grows heavy and the frogs fall silent, the shadows themselves bend to protect Argonian travelers, sheltering them from wandering spirits or beasts roused from deep-rooted nests. Even in Skyrim, far from the swamps that shape them, Argonians maintain this gift. They can sense danger in cold caves, anticipate the hiss of Draugr before bones begin to stir, and feel the currents of unseen tunnels as though they were winding channels of their homeland. This subtle reflex has saved countless caravans and wandering adventurers who unknowingly followed the Argonians' quiet knowledge of where not to step, where not to breathe, and which path would lead them away from the jaws of creatures that had not fed in centuries. This sense is not magic, yet it feels magical, an inheritance of survival granted by a world that tried endlessly to kill them, and a memory that refuses to fade. The Argonian relationship with dreams is equally mysterious, shaped by their bond with the Hist in ways scholars barely understand. When an Argonian sleeps, their mind drifts into layers of memory that do not belong solely to them. Some dreams are personal, shaped by fear, hope, or longing. Others belong to their village or their tribe, echoes of shared understanding woven through their collective consciousness. But some dreams are not Argonian at all. They belong to the Hist, visions that bleed into slumber with the weight of prophecy or remembrance. Those who have experienced these dreams describe them as more than visions. They feel like stories unfolding through sensation, carried on the scent of marsh water or the texture of ancient bark. The Hist communicates not through words, but through impressions. The sharp tang of fear when predators approach, the warmth of sunlight reflecting off still ponds, the thrum of power when roots reach deep enough to touch memories buried beneath centuries of silt. Argonians awakened from these dreams rarely speak of them, believing the meanings too fragile to survive speech and too sacred to be shared casually. Sometimes these dreams guide wanderers toward safe passages or warn them of storms approaching from the deep interior of the marsh. Other times, they reveal fragments of history long forgotten by humans and mirror images of the first tribes rising from the water, of hunters following the call of unseen ancestors, of rituals performed beneath glowing canopies, lit by fireflies that drift like wandering spirits of the swamp. In Skyrim, where the Hist's songs are distant, the dreams grow fainter but never fully fade. Argonians stationed in the frigid north sometimes wake with the phantom feeling of swamp humidity on their skin, as though their soul briefly returned home while their bodies slept beneath snow-covered roofs. The Hist reaches across continents, whispering reminders of identity to its children no matter how far they roam. The bond between Argonians and water is older than recorded history, older even than the tribes themselves. Water in Black Marsh is not simply an element, it is a living archive, storing memories from ages when the world was young and the Hist were the only true witnesses to creation. Argonians learn early that rivers do more than flow, they speak. The current carries information, shifting with the migration of predators, the growth of distant roots, the stirrings of unseen life. Certain tribes teach that if an Argonian listens closely while submerged in calm waters, they can feel faint pulses beneath the surface, the heartbeat of the marsh itself. Scholars dismiss these claims as superstition, yet those who have spent enough time in the marsh agree that water there behaves unlike water anywhere else. It thickens during prophecy rituals, tastes sweet after storms, and shifts hues subtly depending on the moods of the Hist trees that hang over its banks. Argonians swimming in Skyrim's frigid lakes feel the absence of this connection immediately. Cold northern waters are silent to them, pure, lifeless, without memory or intention. Still, their natural affinity allows them to navigate underwater caves or sunken ruins with uncanny ease, reading currents through instinct alone. Stories speak of ancient Argonians who could shape water around themselves, bending it just enough to confuse predators or create ripples that mimicked prey from far away. Though such abilities have faded with time, their legacy remains in the tribe's rituals, where dancers weave their arms like flowing rivers to honor the first hunters who pulled fish from tidal pools lit by bioluminescent marsh stars. Argonian craftsmanship is often misunderstood by outsiders who see only simplicity in their bone tools, shell jewelry, and woven leather garments. But beneath these humble materials lies deep cultural meaning and a level of spiritual precision unmatched by many more technologically advanced societies. Every piece of armor carved from chitin carries a record of the creature it once belonged to, honoring its life with carved marks that tell its story. Spears are crafted not only for war, but to reflect the tribe's unique relationship with the marsh. Some are shaped to move silently through thick reeds, others designed to pierce the scales of predators whose names have been forgotten by most of Tamriel. Argonian huts, built from root and vine, bend in storms instead of breaking, following architectural principles, mimicking tree limbs that yield to the wind. Even their decorations carry purpose. Shell bead patterns often represent seasons, migrations, or the growth cycles of certain Hist roots. Jewelry made from polished bone is rarely ornamental. It reflects lineage, achievements, and spiritual responsibilities. In Skyrim, Argonians continue these traditions despite the harsh cultural contrast. You'll find them carving small totems from wood near the Windhelm docks, or shaping beads from river stones that mimic the colors of the marsh's glimmering wetlands. Their artistry survives in exile, carried like a whisper of home etched into every tool they craft. Argonian oral traditions preserve histories that might otherwise fade completely, stories told not in strict chronology, but in flowing dreamlike patterns that mimic the currents of the swamp. Their narratives blend fact and myth deliberately, not to confuse, but to remind listeners that truth in Black Marsh is never singular. One famous tale speaks of the first deep root, a Hist tree so ancient that it remembered the beginning of the world in perfect clarity. From this first root came the first Argonians, shaped from sap mixed with river mud and blessed with minds that mirrored the adaptability of water itself. Another tale speaks of the silent tide, a ghostly wave that sweeps through the marsh once every 1,000 years, carrying the memories of fallen tribes and depositing them at the feet of new Hist saplings. These stories teach the value of continuity, reminding Argonians that every generation carries the weight of those who came before and contributes to those who will come after. Elders pass down these tales through rhythmic chants or slow dances, illuminated by lanterns made from glowing insects trapped gently beneath thin bark shells. The experience feels less like listening to a story and more like stepping into a shared dream passed down through thousands of years. The most powerful aspect of Argonian culture, however, remains their adaptability, an evolving identity shaped by survival, resilience, and the wisdom of the Hist. Black Marsh has always been a land that refuses to yield, a place where poison drips from leaves. Storms rise with little warning, and predators lurk beneath calm surfaces. To survive there is to master flexibility, shifting behavior as readily as water shifts around stone. This adaptability extends far beyond physical traits. Argonians can adopt new languages quickly, understand foreign social cues, and adjust seamlessly to environments as alien as the frozen north of Skyrim. Their calm focus in harsh conditions has led many to underestimate their intelligence, mistaking quiet observation for simplicity. But Argonians learn by absorbing the world around them, studying tone, intention, and instinct long before they act. In the marsh, reacting too slowly meant death. In Skyrim, it means survival in a land that barely acknowledges the depth of their heritage. Even in the coldest regions, Argonians find ways to adapt their rituals, crafting small bowls of heated water to mimic the warmth of home, or painting subtle patterns on their scales to remind themselves of their tribal roots. Though far removed from the endless wetlands of Black Marsh, Argonians in Skyrim carry the marsh within them, its whispers, its mysteries, its shifting rhythms. They walk with the echo of distant waters in their steps and the quiet guidance of the Hist in their dreams. Even when surrounded by snow instead of reeds and sky crowned with northern lights instead of glowing swamp stars, they remain children of a world that shaped them through hardship and memory. In every shadow they slip through, in every silent movement, in every soft breath drawn beneath unfamiliar skies, the legacy of Black Marsh endures. The Argonians remain bound not by geography but by spirit, carrying the ancient resilience of their homeland into every corner of Tamriel they touch. Deep within the shaded wetland groves of Black Marsh, life moves at a slower, dreamlike pace, as if even the air is content to drift instead of rush, and the water prefers to whisper rather than roar. Every creature that swims or slithers through the region seems to hum in harmony with the land itself, creating a soft, rhythmic pulse that feels like the heart of the swamp beating just beneath the mud. For the Argonians, this pulse is more than background noise. It's a reminder of their place in a world older than any empire, a world shaped by cycles of growth, decay, and renewal that have carried their people forward long before recorded history and will continue long after outsiders have forgotten their names. To understand the Argonians is to understand the way the swamp thinks. For every root, every ripple of water, every tightening of vines around half-crushed ruins tells part of their story. There exists a belief among many travelers that the deeper one walks into Black Marsh, the more the landscape begins to watch them, as though the very trees and waterways pay gentle, patient attention. Argonians know this sensation well, because the land has always held meaning for them beyond what simple sight can convey. They grow up beneath shadows, cast by colossal mangroves that stretch like ancient guardians over their villages, their branches forming natural canopies that filter sunlight into drifting green patterns. These patterns are said to shift in subtle ways when the Hist listens closely, casting small glimmers of light onto paths Argonians are meant to follow. Outsiders dismiss this as tricks of the swamp, but Argonians recognize something more, an awareness woven into the very texture of the land, a presence that guides without commanding and teaches without speaking. That presence shapes not only their journeys, but their entire understanding of purpose. Many scholars from distant provinces assume that Argonians lack written records due to some cultural deficiency, but the truth is that their history is not meant to be stored in paper or stone. Their memory lives in the fluid hush of marsh water, in whispered stories told by elders whose voices carry the mellow cadence of the trees, and in the shared experiences that pass from one generation to the next like flowing currents. An Argonian child doesn't learn through rigid instructions or heavy texts. They observe, mimic, and absorb, guided subtly by the Hist and the invisible dialogue the people maintain with their environment. The result is a culture built not on documentation, but on deeply rooted memory shaped by shared dreams, quiet rituals, and unspoken understandings that stretch back through countless ages. Among these cultural inheritances is the tradition of egg tending, a practice revered so deeply that even the calmest Argonian speaks of it with a softness in their voice. Eggs are placed in sacred pools infused with sap from nearby Hist roots, and the elders sing gentle melodies to them, believing the sound helps shape the hatchling's early connection to their future selves. The pools glow faintly at times, shimmering with a soft bioluminescent light that flickers like the heartbeat of the tree itself. Hatchlings emerge not just as individuals, but as part of an unbroken lineage woven into the larger tapestry of the marsh. Outsiders see eggs as fragile, but Argonians see them as the beginning of a profound relationship with something greater than themselves, a first step in a lifelong bond between person and place. Stories circulate among the tribes about individuals who possess unique senses, blessed by the Hist, people who can feel the subtle tremors in swamp soil days before storms arrive, or who dream of distant places without ever leaving the marsh. Some of these dreamers awaken with impressions so vivid they can describe lands they've never walked, great cities of stone, snow-covered passes, deserts that shimmer like glass. Argonians consider such visions to be gifts, echoes of information the Hist passes along through roots that stretch farther and deeper than any mortal can see. These dreamers often become healers, guides, or advisors, not because they seek such roles, but because the community trusts the quiet wisdom that seems to flow through them. The swamp speaks every language, they say, and every whisper carries purpose. For all the serenity woven into their traditions, the Argonians are no strangers to hardship. The marsh has always been both home and challenge, offering abundance to those who understand it, but danger to those who do not. Venomous plants thrive beside healing ones, and rivers that nourish villages can shift unexpectedly during monsoons. But what outsiders call harsh, Argonians call honest. The land rewards respect and punishes arrogance, teaching lessons with a firmness that never slips into cruelty. This balance has shaped a resilient people capable of adapting to threats both seen and unseen. The Dunmer slave raids, for instance, shaped generations of Argonians whose memories still echo with the pain of chains and stolen kin. Yet even in those shadows, they carried forward with an inner strength that feels almost mythic to those who hear their stories. The rise of these slave hunters carved deep emotional scars across the marsh, but it also forged a unity among tribes that previously shared little more than loose alliances. They learned to communicate through coded bird calls that echoed across dense foliage, and they built hidden passageways in the swamp to move swiftly without catching the eye of invaders. Some elders whisper that during the darkest times, the Hist themselves stirred more intensely, casting protective haze over villages and filling the marshes with illusions that misled slave traders into wandering in circles until they collapsed from exhaustion. History records battles, casualties, and escapes, but Argonian memory holds something more visceral, the collective heartbeat of a people who refuse to bow to cruelty. During the Oblivion Crisis, when portals tore open across Tamriel and Daedra, stormed through the realm with fury and fire, the Argonians surprised everyone with their unprecedented response. Rather than retreating or waiting for rescue, they surged into the portals with fearless precision, driven by a sudden surge of unity and purpose. Legends say the Hist themselves urged the Argonians forward, sending powerful waves of instinct that transformed ordinary warriors into swift, relentless defenders. The Daedra were accustomed to terrified mortals, but the Argonians entered their realm not with fear, but with righteous determination. Many Daedra fled in confusion as the swamp-born fighters moved with uncanny coordination, their eyes glowing faintly with sap-enhanced clarity, their strikes as fluid and merciless as the marsh itself. Even the Daedric generals were said to retreat with unease, uncertain how to fight an enemy who advanced without hesitation. These stories are often embellished with mythic flourish, but Argonians recount them with the calm certainty of people who lived through them. They don't boast of their strength or claim heroism. They simply describe the day the swamp itself entered oblivion, and the day oblivion fell back. The outside world marvels at this victory, but to Argonians, it was no miracle. It was the natural result of unity with the Hist, the living memory that binds their people together in ways no outsider has fully understood. When the crisis ended, many warriors returned changed, their eyes carrying a quiet depth that made others pause. They didn't speak openly of what they saw in the Daedric realms, but their silence felt heavy, like secrets too vast or too sacred to share. Even in peaceful times, Argonians remain deeply tied to ritual and symbolism. One such ritual involves gathering reeds and weaving them into delicate shapes resembling fish, birds, or curling vines. Families place these woven charms near the roots of the nearest Hist tree, believing the shapes represent the personal journeys they wish to follow in the coming seasons. The charms sway softly in the swamp breeze, their gentle rustling sounding almost like whispered encouragement. At the end of the year, the reeds are returned to the marsh waters, symbolizing release, acceptance, and the continuing cycle of growth. Outsiders see only simple craftsmanship, but Argonians recognize a deeper thread of meaning, each charm a quiet promise between themselves and the land they trust with their lives. Trade with other provinces has always existed, but Argonians approach it with a relaxed detachment that confuses many merchants. While other cultures chase wealth or power, Argonians value exchange primarily for its stories, tales carried from distant lands, glimpses of foreign seasons, descriptions of mountains that scrape the sky, deserts that whisper with shifting sands, and cities so vast they stretch beyond the horizon. These stories nourish the mind the way fresh water nourishes the body. In return, Argonians share wisdom shaped by their own homeland, offering insights into survival, adaptation, and the delicate role of humility in a world far older than the creature who walks it. They speak gently, never insisting their perspective is superior, simply offering it like a bowl of warm stew on a cold night, comforting, honest, and quietly profound. There's a particular reverence in the way Argonians interact with water. To them, water is memory in motion, a vessel that carries echoes of countless lives lived, storms weathered, and journeys undertaken. They say that water remembers every touch, every vibration, and every dream whispered above its surface. When an Argonian sits beside a still pond, they can almost feel the memories drifting beneath the surface like slow-moving shadows. In villages built around larger bodies of water, it's common for elders to dip their tails into the shallows at sunset, letting the gentle current wash over them in a ritual of reflection and release. Some call it meditation, but Argonians say it is simply listening to the world, to themselves, and to whatever silent truths drift between the two. Argonian architecture reflects this deep communion with their environment. Homes aren't constructed by conquering the land, but by working with it, weaving structures from strong roots, layers of thick foliage, and stone carried from nearby riverbeds. Many homes blend so seamlessly with their surroundings that outsiders walk past entire villages without realizing they've entered a settlement. Roofs slope like natural canopies, walls curl like reeds, and floors rest lightly on the swamp's surface, rising and falling with shifting tides. Windows are crafted from thin pieces of translucent shell, allowing filtered light to glow through in soft colors reminiscent of dawn. These homes are less buildings and more harmony structures that breathe and shift alongside the marsh instead of resisting it. Some stories say that in the oldest days of the world, before even the elves recorded their earliest histories, the Argonians lived in a time when the Hist spoke with a voice so clear that every tree echoed with language. Back then, the borders between realms were thin, and myths walked the swamps as freely as mortal creatures. Whether these tales are literal truth or symbolic memory hardly matters. To Argonians, the ancient stories remind them that their connection to the Hist is not an invention of culture, but a birthright rooted deeper than time itself. They recall this lore with gentle pride, not arrogance, because they see themselves not as chosen people, but as stewards of something precious. Their understanding of death carries the same quiet acceptance. When an Argonian passes on, their body is returned to marsh waters, sinking slowly beneath the surface as dragonflies dance above. The people believe that the deceased becomes part of the swamp again, nourishing the land that once nourished them. Their spirit drifts into the Hist, merging with memories recorded by roots that stretch into eternity. There is no sorrow in this belief, only a serene comfort, like falling asleep beneath warm rain. Death is not an ending, but a return to the beginning, a soft glide into the embrace of the swamp's endless memory. Yet for all their deep cultural roots, Argonians are remarkably adaptable. They can thrive in snowy climates, dense forests, harsh deserts, and bustling cities, adjusting their habits with a fluid grace that surprises many other races. This adaptability doesn't dilute their identity. Rather, it highlights the strength of a culture that understands the value of flexibility. The marsh teaches them to bend without breaking, to shift course when needed, and to continue forward even when the path twists beneath their feet. Where others see chaos, Argonians see opportunity. Where others see danger, they see challenge. And where others see isolation, they see connection. In recent ages, as war, politics, and shifting alliances reshape Tamriel, the Argonians remain calm observers, carrying the quiet confidence of a people who understand that empires rise and fall like ripples on water. They offer their strength when needed, withdraw when wise, and move with the unhurried certainty of creatures who have lived alongside eternity for longer than anyone can measure. Their wisdom doesn't manifest in grand proclamations or written treatises, but in gentle gestures, subtle smiles, and the patient way they navigate a world that rarely takes the time to understand them. What outsiders often fail to see is that every Argonian carries a piece of the Hist inside them, like a small ember of ancient memory glowing in their core. It gives them strength, resilience, intuition, and a sense of belonging that cannot be shaken by war or conquest. Even those who leave the marsh for distant provinces feel an invisible tether guiding their hearts back home. They may walk snowy mountains or arid dunes, but the faint echo of swamp song lingers in their dreams, calling them gently, reminding them that no matter where they wander, they are never truly alone. And perhaps the greatest secret of the Argonians is their serenity. They have seen the world's cruelty, felt the sting of chains and war, and walked through realms of fire and shadow. Yet they endure not through vengeance or hardened hearts, but through harmony with themselves, with their people, and with the ever-listening Hist. In a world where chaos often reigns, they remain anchored, grounded, and quietly wise. The marsh flows through their veins, reminding them to move like water, to adapt like reeds, and to survive like roots that cling steadily to the earth, no matter how fierce the storm. Their story is not one of suffering or triumph, but of balance. A balance between individuality and community, between the physical and the spiritual, between the world as it is and the world as it remembers itself to be. An Argonian walking through the swamp at twilight carries generations of memory in their stride, leaving gentle ripples in the water behind them, ripples that fade slowly, like stories whispered into the night. And long after they disappear into the shadows of their homeland, the marsh continues to murmur its soft lullaby, reminding all who listen that peace, resilience, and quiet purpose are gifts carried not in words, but in the simple act of belonging. The deeper one travels into the story of the Argonians, the more their world begins to feel like a place that breathes differently from the rest of Tamriel, a land where the boundaries between body and spirit, past and present, are thin enough to pass through like mist. Black Marsh is often described as hostile to outsiders, but to Argonians, it is something closer to a cradle, a living realm that shapes its children with tender ferocity, teaching them through sensation rather than words. For them, the marsh is not landscape but memory. The Hist not simply trees, but a collective soul that holds together a people who would otherwise be scattered like broken scales. And so, when thinking about Argonian life, it becomes impossible to separate an individual from their environment. Every choice they make, every emotion they feel, every instinct they follow is entwined with a history rooted deeper than any foundation in Cyrodiil or Skyrim. Argonian childhoods begin in water, not only because of physiology, but because the marsh expects it. Even in tribal villages, far from the ancient Hist groves, the newborn are introduced to the swamp in rituals that feel both ceremonial and soothing. The temperature of the water, the scent of the mud, the weight of the humidity, all of it is familiar to an Argonian, even before they understand the meaning of their own names. Many scholars have tried to determine whether this connection is purely cultural, or if Argonians are born with an inherited memory of the marsh. But the answer seems to escape categorization, as if culture and biology merge into something inseparable. The young learn to swim before they walk, and they learn the sounds of the swamp before they learn to speak. Their sense of home is built through sensation, the distant croak of unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves stirred by movements that could be wind or something else entirely, the warmth of algae-coated stones under sun. These become the lullabies of their early life, shaping identities that feel deeply intertwined with the place they come from. As Argonians grow older, they discover that the Hist speaks to them in ways both subtle and undeniable. Some describe the Hist's voice as a whisper, a feeling that rises through their spine like soft vibration. Others say it is a dream, a memory not their own, or an emotion that arrives without warning. Whatever form it takes, it is a presence woven into their consciousness from the moment they hatch. The Hist does not give orders, nor does it impose destiny. Instead, it suggests paths, nudges hearts, and opens doors that might otherwise remain unseen. The swamp recognizes its children, understanding their strengths, fears, and hidden longings in ways even the Argonians themselves cannot fully articulate. It is not unusual for a young Argonian to spend an entire day in quiet communion with a nearby Hist, hands placed against bark smooth as stone, eyes half closed, listening for guidance that comes not as language but as understanding. To an outsider, the moment might look like meditation. To an Argonian, it is conversation. For those born close to powerful Hist roots, the connection is even stronger, Some tribes believe that hatchlings in certain regions are born with lingering memories from previous cycles of life, not reincarnation in the traditional sense, but a continuation of consciousness in a new form. These memories are often fragmented images of unrecognizable faces, glimpses of battles fought long ago, or the emotional weight of choices made by Argonians who lived centuries before. To them, time behaves less like a straight path and more like a spiral, looping back on itself in ways only the Hist truly understands. This creates an identity that feels both ancient and new, a sense of being part of something far older than the body they inhabit. Even their sense of mortality shifts. Argonians rarely fear death the way other races do, because the Hist absorbs them into its memories, ensuring no experience is ever fully lost. Argonian spirituality deepens as they reach adulthood, especially for those chosen to become tree minders, shamans, or healers. Among these roles, the tree minder holds one of the highest honors, serving as liaison between tribe and Hist. Their daily life is one of listening, tending, and interpreting the subtle emotions carried through the sap. They are not leaders in the traditional political sense, but they carry profound influence because their understanding of the Hist is considered essential to the tribe's well-being. A tree minder may spend hours each day in trance-like states, allowing the Hist's visions to rise within them. These visions often come as symbolic images: a serpent coiling through roots, a storm forming on distant waters, a glowing egg suspended in warmth. The interpretation of these symbols guides the tribe's decisions, whether it concerns migration, conflict, or healing rituals. Outsiders sometimes see this as mysticism, but to Argonians it is practical wisdom, a way of ensuring survival by staying aligned with the living essence of their homeland. Daily life in Black Marsh is shaped by rhythms of nature rather than constructed schedules. Argonians move with the patterns of water and weather, adjusting routines to match the unpredictable changes of their environment. When mists drift low through the trees, thick enough to hide predators or obscure paths, the tribes stay close to safe routes, spending those hours maintaining tools, preparing food, or sharing stories carved into memory. When sunlight warms the marshlands and the air grows thick with the hum of insects, Argonians take advantage of the visibility to hunt, gather herbs, or travel between settlements. Their hunts are quiet and respectful, guided by an understanding that every creature in the marsh plays a role in the fabric of life. Argonians rarely take more than they need, and when they do kill, they perform small rituals of gratitude, touching the earth or whispering thanks to the Hist for providing sustenance. This relationship with the land is not sentimental, it is instinctual, a bond built from survival and reciprocity. Argonian craftsmanship reflects this same harmony with their environment. Tools are carved from wood that grows naturally in curved shapes, allowing them to fit comfortably in hand without forcing the material into unnatural angles. Armor is often made from hardened scales shed by local creatures or woven from reeds and fibers that offer surprising durability. Their architecture blends seamlessly with the marsh, using platforms suspended above water, bridges crafted from living vines, and walls reinforced with mud that hardens under certain swamp conditions. Villages seem to grow out of the landscape rather than being built upon it, giving the impression that the settlements themselves breathe. House walls contain openings that invite airflow, and floors are often flexible woven surfaces that adjust to the shifting earth beneath. This constant adaptation ensures their homes endure even in harsh weather, surviving storms that would splinter wooden structures in other regions. Argonian social bonds are fluid, shaped more by shared purpose than rigid family structures. While hatchlings do know their clutchmates and caretakers, the tribe raises children collectively, believing that community is stronger when every adult plays a role in guiding the young. This creates a social environment where every Argonian feels both independent and deeply supported. Friendships develop naturally in this system, often becoming lifelong partnerships forged in trust and survival. Argonians seldom cling to rigid hierarchies or titles. Their society functions through shared responsibility and mutual respect, and leadership arises organically from those who demonstrate wisdom and reliability. This communal mindset extends into their interactions with outsiders. Argonians rarely show hostility unless provoked, but they do maintain wariness toward those who misunderstand the marsh's unique rhythms. The marsh teaches its people caution through experience, not warning. Many outsiders underestimate its dangers, believing swamps to be simple terrain, unaware of the countless hidden threats. The ground can shift without warning, concealing deep pools of sinking mud. Trees that appear sturdy may be infested with venomous parasites, and calm waters can erupt with the jaws of predators, blending seamlessly with the vegetation. Argonians navigate these dangers not through maps or instructions, but through instinct and the faint sensibilities the Hist provides. They can sense the slight acidity in water that signals corruption, the faint shift in air pressure that hints at hidden predators, or the way ripples form on still pools revealing unseen movements. Their survival is not luck, it is attunement to their homeland in ways no other race can fully comprehend. When Argonians leave Black Marsh, they feel the absence of the Hist sharply, like a gentle voice fading into silence. Some describe it as loneliness, others as disorientation. Without the constant presence of the Hist's emotions guiding them, they must rely more on personal intuition, adapting to environments that feel oddly quiet. Yet even far from the marsh, the bond is never severed completely. Argonians still experience dreams shaped by the Hist, still receive moments of unexpected insight, and still feel subtle urges that pull them towards certain choices. Many return to the marsh eventually, compelled by a longing described as bone deep. Others remain abroad because the Hist wishes to observe Tamriel through their eyes, expanding its understanding of the broader world. In this sense, Argonians who travel become extensions of the Hist's perception, living sensory threads that carry new knowledge back to the roots. Their experiences in foreign lands add layers of complexity to their identity. Argonians who encounter Nords, Imperials, or Dunmer often face prejudice or misunderstanding, yet they navigate these challenges with quiet resilience. Their emotions are steady, shaped by the constant support of the Hist in their early years. They seldom lash out in anger. Instead, they observe, adapt, and endure. Over time, they build relationships that transcend cultural barriers, offering perspectives shaped by a homeland whose lessons are unlike any other. They see spirits in places others overlook, sense danger in landscapes others deem safe, and view life as a continuous cycle of transformation rather than a linear path toward death. Beneath all of this complexity lies the core truth of Argonian existence. They are a people shaped by memory, instinct, and connection. Their bodies reflect the swamp's resilience. Their minds carry echoes of the Hist's ancient wisdom, and their spirits intertwine with the land that raised them. Whether carving new futures in distant provinces or returning to the marsh to rest beneath its whispering branches, Argonians remain bound to something vast and living. Their story is not confined to survival. It is a song of unity between individual and world, a quiet testament to the way life persists even in the wildest corners of Tamriel. And as they journey through their long, winding histories, the Hist continues to watch over them, ancient and patient, guiding each Argonian along paths woven from the roots of memory and the shimmering waters of destiny. There is a quiet truth that lingers beneath the surface of Argonian culture, one that becomes clearer the more you journey through the deeper marshes, where the fog hangs low and the world feels as though it is dreaming. In those places, far beyond the well-trodden paths trodden by travelers from the imperial city or the caravans that thread their way toward Solstheim, the Argonians speak of something older than even the Hist, something they call the Echo Swamp, where time does not move forward in a straight line, but drifts gently like a ripple across still water. They insist this place remembers every footstep ever taken within the marsh, and that the earth beneath the water listens the way a living creature listens, waiting patiently for the next story to sink into its roots. Argonian elders describe the Echo Swamp as a memory made physical, a place where past and present walk side by side without ever touching, and where the dead can speak to the living in whispers carried by drifting reeds. Those who wander there long enough claim they feel the gentle weight of centuries pressing softly against their skin, not with fear, but with a comforting heaviness, like being wrapped in the arms of something that knows exactly who you are. Some scholars from Cyrodiil have tried to map these regions, but their ink runs on parchment when the humidity rises, and their compasses spin beneath the canopy, unable to decide which direction to choose. The Argonians smile when outsiders speak of getting lost. In their eyes, being lost is simply choosing not to listen. They say the marsh always tells you where to go if you stand still long enough to feel its heartbeat humming faintly through the ground. The roots beneath the surface form a labyrinth of living channels where knowledge flows like sap, and if you let your breathing soften and match the rhythm of the swamp, the land reveals the path you are meant to take. It is a kind of communion outsiders struggle to understand, because it does not come from logic or maps, but from trust in a landscape that cannot be tamed and does not want to be. There is a story among the Argonians that long before the first stone of the white gold tower was ever raised, before men and myrrh argued over borders and divinity, the Hist were shaping memories. Not storing them, but shaping them, the same way water shapes clay. According to this story, every Argonian carries a memory that does not belong to them, a memory older than their body, older than the swamp, older even than the Hist themselves. It is the memory of a time when the world had not yet chosen what it was going to become, a time when everything was fluid, soft, dreamlike. The Argonians call this memory the first breath. It is not something they can describe easily. It does not come as an image or a sound, but as a feeling, a sensation of drifting through a world where creation itself was undecided. Some feel it during deep meditation. Others feel it during the moment of sap communion, when their skin drinks deeply of the Hist's essence and their soul opens like a new leaf. A rare few feel it only once, in the moment before death, a final gift from the roots that nurtured them since their first heartbeat. Argonian children raised far from Black Marsh sometimes experience the first breath unexpectedly. It comes to them in dreams they struggle to describe, dreams filled with soft, glowing water and a faint hum that vibrates through their bones. Many dismiss these dreams as coincidence, but elders insist the first breath is universal, a thread tying all Argonians back to the same ancient source, no matter how far they wander from their homeland. They say this is why Argonians rarely feel fear of the unknown, why they approach new lands, new people, and new challenges with a steady calm that confounds the more anxious races of Tamriel. They have already felt the beginning of all things. Nothing that comes after can truly frighten them. In the dense heart of the marsh exist small enclaves of Argonians, known as the Leaf Readers, individuals chosen from birth to interpret patterns in the Hist that others overlook. They spend hours sitting silently beneath the great roots, watching how sap flows through translucent channels that glow faintly when moonlight filters through the canopy. A leaf reader can predict storms days before they form, sense travelers approaching long before their footsteps disturb the mud, and feel conflict approaching in the same way one feels pressure before thunder splits the sky. Imperials often call these abilities superstition, but the leaf readers possess knowledge that cannot be dismissed so easily. They are rarely wrong, and when they speak, even the bravest warriors fall silent to listen. The swamp bends around them, shifting subtly to guide their visions, and the Hist speaks more clearly to them than to any other. They are not leaders by rank or decree, but by wisdom that flows from roots older than empires. Argonians have a quiet tradition practiced far from the ears of outsiders, something they call the walking dream. Once each year, when the swamp glows with soft luminescence from the pollen drifting across its surface, entire communities gather in silence. They consume a drop of sap mixed with crushed petals from a flower that blooms only at night. The mixture induces a trance that allows them to wander through memories not their own. Some walk through visions of ancestors who lived centuries before. Others drift through the memories of the Hist itself, feeling the slow, steady pulse of roots reaching deeper than mountains. A few step into fragments of futures not yet written. The experience is not frightening. It is comforting, like stepping into a warm current and letting it carry you gently toward unseen shores. When the trance ends, they return to their homes quietly, carrying the weight of new understanding, never boasting of what they saw. Travelers sometimes wonder why Argonians remain so calm in the face of tragedies that would break other peoples. They endure slavery, war, loss, and exile with a quiet resilience that seems almost supernatural. The truth lies in their relationship with memory. To the Argonians, death is not an ending, and pain is not wasted. When an Argonian suffers, the Hist absorbs their grief like rainwater soaking into soil. It becomes part of the swamp, filtered through its ancient intelligence until it emerges as something softer, something that strengthens the next generation. Argonians do not see themselves as isolated individuals, but as nodes in a vast living network that redistributes experience the way the swamp redistributes water. Their sorrow nourishes others, their joy is shared. Their victories echo through roots, and their mistakes fade gently into lessons whispered by leaves. It is a way of living that carries a kind of beauty few outside the marsh ever understand. There are stories told by Argonian shadow scouts, those who serve as the swamp's quiet guardians, slipping through mud and fog like ghosts. They speak of creatures no outsider has ever seen, luminous serpents that glide through the water without disturbing the surface, insects that glow in patterns resembling constellations unknown to Tamriel, and ancient reptiles said to possess intelligence rivaling that of any mage in the arcane university. These creatures are not myths meant to frighten travelers. They are part of the living ecosystem shaped by the Hist. Some come to the surface only when called by specific vibrations in the roots, emerging like memories rising from a dreaming mind. Others exist solely to maintain balance, feeding on toxins or pruning plants that grow too aggressively. The marsh is not chaotic. It is curated by unseen hands, every motion intentional, every shadow part of a grand design only the Hist fully understands. Argonian spirituality is not built on worship in the same way imperial or altmary faiths are. They do not kneel before the Hist or demand blessings from it. Instead, they form a symbiotic relationship based on respect and mutual survival. The Hist protects them not because it must, but because their existence enriches its own. Every Argonian heartbeat sends faint pulses through the roots. Every thought, every dream, Every emotion is registered like ripples crossing still water. The Hist does not control its people, but it carries them, cradles them in ways other mortals cannot perceive. In return, the Argonians act as its hands, its eyes, its guardians when the world shifts in ways that threaten balance. The relationship is not one of master and servant, but of mother and child, or perhaps dreamer and dream. When Argonians leave Black Marsh, they often feel a quiet ache beneath their ribs, a gentle tug that pulls them southward no matter how far they travel. This ache is not homesickness in the traditional sense. It is the sensation of being uprooted, the sense of a connection stretching across vast distances like a thread of silk pulled taut. The Hist does not force them to return, but the bond remains. The sap continues to whisper through their veins, reminding them of the warm waters and the soft glow of fungus beneath ancient trees, of the voices drifting from the canopy, of the world that shaped them before they ever learned to speak. When they eventually return, even after years abroad, the marsh greets them without judgment, recognizing them immediately as if they had never left at all. Some Argonians speak of a phenomenon they call root echo, a moment when the swamp itself repeats something that has not yet happened, a bird call echoing before it is sung, a ripple in water forming before anything touches its surface, a faint whisper rising before a breeze stirs the leaves. These moments are rare and subtle, often dismissed by outsiders as tricks of the senses, but to Argonians, they are signs of the Hist drifting in thought, reaching forward, remembering the future the same way it remembers the past. Time, to the Hist, is simply another river running through the swamp, one that can be followed upstream or downstream depending on the needs of the moment. There is a final story Argonians tell only in hushed voices, spoken around fires where the smoke curls upward like drifting memories. They believe that after death, an Argonian does not simply become one with the Hist. Instead, their spirit travels through the roots, passing through countless memories before choosing the moment they wish to return. Rebirth is not random, it is chosen. An Argonian soul drifts through the deep places where the swamp glows faintly with ancient magic, selecting the life that will give them the experiences they still wish to learn. Some choose hardship to grow stronger, others choose peace to heal. In this cycle of return, the Argonians find a kind of immortality unlike any other, a gentle, endless journey through versions of themselves guided by the steady dream of the Hist. The deeper currents of Argonian understanding flow through places untouched by mortal footsteps, marshes where the canopy grows so thick that the sun filters through in trembling strands, weaving pale gold across still water. In these hidden layers of black marsh, the Argonians drift between shadows and memory, moving with a quiet grace that makes it impossible to tell where their bodies end and the swamp begins. Outsiders picture the Argonians as simple marsh dwellers, but beneath the surface lies a culture shaped by 1,000 currents of history, a people born not only of their environment, but of a living force that whispers through their scales. Everything they know, every tradition, every choice, every belief is steeped in the rhythm of the Hist, the ancient trees, whose roots dig not just into soil, but into time itself. The further one travels from the noise of cities and the tangle of empire, the more apparent it becomes that the Argonians do not simply inhabit the swamp. They are woven from it, shaped by a world that breathes differently than any other land on Tamriel. Scattered tales within old Saxhleel myths speak of places where the Hist grows so ancient that even memory trembles beneath its branches. These elder groves are said to sing with a resonance felt only by Argonians born under certain constellations, their minds somehow tuned to ancestral echoes buried in the sap. Some travelers claim that if one stands still long enough, the ground itself seems to pulse faintly, as if the soil carries the heartbeat of a world older than the Merethic era. In these groves, Argonian shamans called tree minders sink their claws into the bark, closing their eyes until time dissolves, and the Hist offers visions and images rather than words. Sometimes those visions come as memories not their own, glimpses of ancient wars or unseen futures swirling like reflected clouds on water. To an Argonian, the future is not a distant river, but a tide that moves backward and forward, shaped by choices already whispered to the roots before they are made. Because of this, Argonian philosophy rarely focuses on the idea of destiny. Instead, their teachings revolve around rhythm, moving with the flow of the swamp, never against it. Elders teach that resistance to change brings stagnation, while bending to the world's natural direction opens paths that cannot be forced by will alone. The swamp teaches patience and adaptability. A predator that crashes through the reeds might find only mud. One who waits, breathing with the marsh, may find the world itself guiding prey toward their open hands. It is this mindset, shaped by centuries under the Hist's guidance, that gives Argonians their uncanny ability to remain calm when outsiders would panic, to endure hardship without collapsing beneath its weight. So much of their resilience comes not from strength of body, but from the quiet certainty that the world moves in ways one cannot always understand, ways the Hist has already felt in its sap rivers long before mortals give them names. Many Argonians speak of the moment they first touched his sap as something deeply transformative, an awakening of senses that were muted before. To most, the sap does not grant knowledge in the way a book does. Instead, it expands awareness, allowing emotions, intuition, and ancestral memory to intertwine. Some describe it as suddenly noticing currents in the world they had never realized existed, currents that guide decisions not through logic, but through instinct made profound. Young Saxhleel say the sap reveals how the swamp listens, how trees lean subtly when storms approach, how lizards shift their movements when rain is coming, and how silence in the marsh is often a voice in disguise. The Hist teaches them to read the world the way a scholar reads scrolls. Every ripple, every breath of wind, every tremble in the reeds becomes part of a language the Argonians understand instinctively once the sap awakens their senses. Legends speak of Argonians born during rare cosmic alignments who can hear the Hist even before sap touches their tongue. These children often wander the marshes alone, pausing at tree roots as though listening to voices no one else can hear. Elders treat them with reverence, believing that the Hist chooses such individuals as bridges between ages, those who can interpret dreams in ways ordinary Argonians cannot. Some become healers, others warriors, a few tree minders, and fewer still grow into spiritual guides whose insight shapes entire tribes. For the Saxhleel, leadership is never forced upon those who seek power. Instead, it rises gently from those whose spirits hum in harmony with the trees, those whose presence seems to quiet storms and soothe even the most restless roots. Outside Black Marsh, Argonians often hide the depth of their spiritual understanding from foreign eyes. In places like Cyrodiil or Skyrim, where the land sleeps rather than breathes, they move differently, quieter, more inward, guided by a rhythm others cannot sense. Many outsiders mistake this calmness for detachment, unaware of the internal dialogue constantly flowing between Argonians and memories that stretch back long before men or Mer walked Tamriel. Even those Saxhleel who have never tasted sap since leaving home feel ghosts soft tugging on their thoughts, faint whispers of marsh wind reminding them they are not alone. Some say that no matter how far an Argonian wanders, a thread remains woven between their spirit and the Hist, a tether of green memory that hums gently beneath consciousness like a lullaby carried on warm marsh air. Argonian architecture, so often misunderstood as rudimentary, actually reflects an ancient design philosophy built upon harmony rather than dominance. Their homes bend with the landscape, using natural curves of trees and wetlands instead of flattening land or carving stone. Each structure is crafted with an understanding that the swamp shifts with every season and tide, so their buildings must breathe along with it. Platforms built high into mangrove roots sway softly with storms, absorbing wind instead of resisting it. Walls woven from reeds expand and contract in humidity, working with the weather rather than against it. Everything is designed to fade back into the marsh once its purpose ends, returning gracefully to the earth without leaving scars. This deep respect for impermanence is what perplexes many outsiders, who view time as something to conquer, while Argonians see it as a river best traveled lightly, leaving no footprints behind that the rain cannot wash away. Black Marsh's creatures, too, shape Argonian culture in subtle ways. The soft-skinned lizards, known as narrow slips, teach young Argonians about silence and patience. The great marsh dragons, rare, elusive beasts, with scales that shimmer like damp obsidian, appear in countless Saxhleel legends as guardians of the deepest roots. Even the smallest insects carry meanings in their movements, with shamans reading omens in the ways their wings glint beneath dappled light. Argonians believe every creature in the swamp moves according to the Hist's rhythm, each one a note in a song older than the world, and they study those patterns not out of superstition, but out of reverence for a living ecosystem that has shaped their people's philosophy for longer than any written record. Argonian names, often dismissed by outsiders as simple hissing sounds or translated phrases, carry depths that reflect lifetime milestones, personal growth, and spiritual insight. A Saxhleel's name is not static, it changes as they do. Some earn new titles upon notable achievements. Others receive theirs from visions granted through sap communion, while a rare few have names bestowed by the Hist itself. To outsiders, these names may seem strange or humorous, but to an Argonian, a name is a story, a record of the soul's journey through time and experience. Even the decision to use an imperial name is not a sign of assimilation, but a kind of mask worn voluntarily when navigating cultures that might misunderstand the weight of their true identity. Beneath every adopted name lies the hum of swamp water memory, ready to return home when called. Travelers who spend long enough in Black Marsh often describe dreams filled with green light, warm humidity, and the sound of distant chanting. Some believe these dreams are simply byproducts of the marsh's environment, the mind reacting to unfamiliar landscapes. But Argonians know better. They say the Hist reaches out gently to strangers, whispering curiosity through dreams rather than words. Visitors who awaken feeling deeply rested or strangely emotional are said to have been acknowledged by the trees, not accepted, but noticed an exceedingly rare honor for those not born of the marsh. These dreams seldom come twice, as the Hist is cautious when brushing against foreign spirits. Yet each encounter leaves an impression, a gentle reminder that Black Marsh is more than a place. It is a consciousness, vast and ancient, observing the world through green-lit dreams. Argonian warriors train not through rigid discipline, but through fluidity. Their movements resemble the swamp itself, soft at first glance, but capable of striking with sudden, overwhelming precision. They learn to channel momentum through their tails, to slip through reeds silently, to strike from angles that confuse even seasoned soldiers. Many outsiders underestimate them, believing their peaceful demeanor implies weakness. Yet the Saxhleel carry a grace that mirrors their homeland, a balance between calm silence and explosive motion. Stories tell of warriors who disappear beneath murky water, only to rise behind enemies with a blade of bone or obsidian held steady in clawed hands. To fight an Argonian in their own territory is to challenge the swamp itself, a battle few outsiders ever survive. The spiritual connection between Argonians and water runs deeper than simple geography. Water symbolizes memory in Saxhleel traditions, for it mirrors the world while forever shifting, never holding the same reflection twice. Elders teach that life is like rippling water fluid, cyclical, and shaped by unseen undercurrents. Ceremonies involving water are common, from rites marking the transition to adulthood to the final rituals that guide a departed soul back to the roots from which it first came. In these ceremonies, droplets are said to carry whispers from the Hist, their patterns dancing upon the surface in ways interpreted by tree minders as messages from spirits who have long since returned to the green. Even Argonian laughter carries a special kind of music, a soft clicking sound that harmonizes with the marsh in ways outsiders rarely understand. To hear a group of Argonians laughing together beneath moonlit mangroves is to witness a sound that belongs to no other culture, a song woven from the pulse of the swamp, the whisper of night birds, and the rustle of wind against reeds. Long before the rest of Tamriel understood the value of communal bonds, Argonians cultivated them through shared stories, shared hunts, shared rituals, each moment strengthening ties not just between people, but between people and the land that shaped them. Contemplating Argonian culture is like observing a river at night, its surface dark and calm, while unimaginable depth moves beneath. Every choice, every belief, every act of kindness or quiet strength carries echoes of a civilization woven into the roots of time. They are not beings who cling to the past, nor do they chase distant futures. Instead, they exist in harmony with each unfolding moment, guided by a wisdom whispered through sap and soil, a wisdom carried through generations by trees that have stood since before mortals learned to speak. To understand the Argonians is not to study them, it is to feel the world the way they feel it, to breathe in the soft heat of the swamp and hear, in its vast, unending silence, the heartbeat of the Hist pulsing through every living thing. The deeper one travels into the dense and ancient wilds of Black Marsh, the more the land begins to behave like something aware of its own presence. The trees lean a little closer as if listening. The marsh water ripples in slow circles without any breeze, and the faint cry of distant lizards carries a kind of emotion that feels older than speech. To an outsider, it is nothing more than uncanny nature, but to an Argonian born in these steaming wetlands, it is the quiet chorus of their home paying attention. They believe the swamps remember footsteps, not metaphorically, but literally, storing impressions of those who walk through them in ways no outsider can truly detect. The Hist sap within the roots carries these impressions, weaving them into the memory of the marsh. It is why an Argonian returning home after years abroad sometimes stops suddenly on a trail they have not walked. Since childhood, they can feel the echo of their own past selves drifting through the trees like a soft afterimage, greeting them gently through living memory. In Argonian villages built half above water and half beneath it, the architecture reflects the layered nature of their society. Above the surface are huts made from bent reeds and woven bark that sway lightly with the motions of the wind. But below the rippling water lies an entire second layer, hollowed out roots, submerged tunnels, dens carved from the soft mud. Some homes connect to others in ways outsiders never see, forming a labyrinth of hidden passages that only those who grew up with the marsh's rhythm can navigate. What seems chaotic to foreign eyes is, to an Argonian, a perfect harmony of fluid space, always shifting slightly, always growing, always alive. It is said that a skilled Argonian can close their eyes and still walk from one end of their village to the other simply by listening to the way water echoes off the walls, the way the roots hum when touched by the sap's flow, and the way frogs and insects shift their songs in greeting. Argonian childhood is shaped not by strict lessons, but by silent observation. Their elders rarely lecture openly. Instead, they teach through presence, through the way they move across the swamp, through small gestures that contain entire lessons. A child learns to read danger by watching how the ripples form around their parents' feet, how quickly they breathe when approaching thick underbrush, how lightly they step when crossing a log bridge that looks sturdy but isn't. One elder's quiet caution becomes a child's lifelong instinct, carried onward like a whisper. In this way, their wisdom feels inherited not through words but through a kind of cultural osmosis, blending tradition with intuition so seamlessly that the boundary between the two disappears. Even combat training among Argonians follows this quiet method. Instead of formal drills, young hunters watch the older warriors stalk prey in the swamp, noting every pause, every moment of stillness. They learn how to breathe shallowly so as not to disturb the water, how to sense vibrations through their feet before a predator appears, how to disappear into the reeds by sinking just below the surface with only their nostrils exposed. Outsiders often misunderstand Argonian combat as improvisational, but in truth, it follows patterns as ancient as the roots that wind beneath the marsh. The sap itself teaches a rhythm, a rise and fall, a wait and strike that is less martial technique and more a conversation between hunter and environment. Every Argonian tribe maintains a sacred place where the Hist roots break the surface in tangled whorls, forming natural shrines that drip sap like tears. These shrines are not uniform. Each has its own personality, its own shape, its own subtle whisper that only those attuned to it can decipher. When a tribe gathers around these roots, they do so not in silence but in reverent quiet, heads bowed as the sap glistens in dim light. Some shrines glow faintly during certain phases of the moons, casting reflections across the water like shimmering threads of memory. Others thrum with low vibrations, pulses that ripple through the ground and travel into the bones of all who stand near them. Tribes say these shrines can speak, though not with words. They speak in feelings, in inklings, in visions glimpsed just before sleep. The Hist never commands, it nudges, guiding with gentleness rather than authority. Argonian naming traditions are among the most unique in Tamriel, often shaped by life events or the interpretation of elders who sense a child's nature through the Hist. Names like walks in shadows, sleeps with venoms, or hides his heart carry meanings far beyond their literal phrasing. A name is both a story and a prophecy, an echo of the past and a suggestion of the future. It is said that when an Argonian changes profoundly, the Hist may whisper to them a new name during moments of deep communion, shifting their identity like shedding skin. To outsiders, such names seem literal, but among Argonians, they represent layers of meaning, emotional tendencies, spiritual alignments, and subtle hints at one's role in the tribe. A name does not merely describe, it reveals. His sap remains perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Argonian culture. To some, it appears as a strange resin with hallucinogenic properties, but to Argonians, it is a link to ancestry, to memory, to the very blueprint of their soul. When consumed by an outsider, the sap can induce visions too overwhelming to comprehend fragments of thought not meant for foreign minds. But when consumed by an Argonian, the sap is a language. It speaks in sensations rather than sentences, conveying knowledge the way a dream conveys emotion. Through it, they understand where to travel, which battles to avoid, and which bonds to nurture. It is why Argonians return to the Hist after death, their souls flowing back into the roots like rainfall returning to the sea. They are born of the sap, and so they return to it. The marsh is home to creatures that exist nowhere else, being so intimately tied to the roots and waters that they feel like manifestations of the environment itself. Giant salamanders that glow faintly beneath their skin slither through dark pools like living lanterns, their movements guiding travelers towards safety when storms thicken the air. Dragonflies with wings as thin as spider webs circle above Argonian shrines, forming shifting symbols in the air as though spelling out silent prayers. Even the predatory boghounds, vicious and territorial to outsiders, soften their growls when Argonians walk by, often lowering their heads in recognition. These subtle behaviors create the impression that the creatures of Black Marsh are listening to something deeper than instinct, a shared awareness threaded through the living Hist. Magic among Argonians often appears simple on the surface. Healing done through poultices, guidance offered through intuition, rituals involving bone charms, or carved wooden idols that float across the swamp at dusk. But beneath these practices lies an ancient system of spiritual alignment. Their shamans use water as a conduit, ripples becoming channels for predicting shifts in fate. They read patterns in mud as though deciphering runes, each swirl carrying a metaphorical truth. Their healing magic blends alchemy with something more organic, the ability to harmonize a wounded body with the natural rhythm of the swamp. An Argonian healer can sense imbalance like one senses a storm, an intuition honed over lifetimes of listening to living trees and moving waters. The concept of time itself functions differently among Argonians. They measure moments not through sun or moon, but through cycles of the swamp, the flowering of certain plants, the shift in frog calls, the density of humidity in the air. To an Argonian elder, a year might be described not by calendar days, but by how deeply the roots expanded or how quickly the rains arrived. This creates an entirely different experience of memory. When they speak of events long past, they often reference environmental states rather than dates. When the marsh winds grew cold, or during the season when the water ran silver, their sense of history becomes entwined with the land's breathing, making memory not linear but circular, always returning, always resonating in patterns. Argonian spirituality includes numerous lesser-known deities and spirits beyond the Hist, beings who inhabit specific rivers, stones, or groves. These spirits are neither worshipped nor feared, they are respected. A hunter may whisper thanks to the river spirit after crossing a dangerous channel. A fisher might place a carved shell at the base of a tree believed to guard the lakes. Even their funerary traditions involve releasing bound reeds into the swamp, allowing the current to carry the deceased's spiritual remnants toward the roots beneath the mud. In this way, the swamp becomes a communal afterlife, a vessel for souls drifting gently back to the Hist. Music in Argonian culture is unlike any other in Tamriel. Their instruments are crafted from hollowed reeds, chitin shells, and the thin bones of swamp birds, producing sounds that mimic the crackle of wet wood or the hum of distant insects. This creates melodies that feel more like the marsh singing through them than songs performed by individuals. During celebrations, entire tribes gather around fires that burn blue from sap-soaked logs, their musicians playing harmonies that echo across the water, blending with frogs, night birds, and the rustling of vines. The music drifts like fog, softening the edges of the night until every creature seems part of one immense, breathing symphony. Argonian weather sense is legendary. Some can sniff the air and predict storms a day in advance. Others watch the way lizards lie on warm stones, or how water vibrates near their ankles to read incoming changes. Outsiders sometimes think these abilities are magic, but to the Argonians, they come from observation so deep it becomes instinct. This intuition is why they survive in the deadliest parts of the swamp places filled with poisonous plants, sinking mud pits, or aggressive creatures. They can sense where the ground is solid by the smell of the water, or which vines carry toxins by the way insects avoid them. Knowledge of the marsh isn't learned, it is absorbed. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Argonian society is the fluidity between individuality and unity. Each Argonian is uniquely shaped by their connection to the Hist, yet they also share a collective consciousness that links them subtly to one another. In times of great danger, tribes often react in perfect harmony, their movements echoing one another as though guided by a shared instinct. They do not discuss strategy, they simply respond as though their thoughts align. It is not mind control, nor is it hive behavior. It is a spiritual resonance carried through the sap itself, a reminder that while each Argonian is an individual, they are also branches of the same ancient tree. Even their dreams feel woven from the living swamp. An Argonian sleep often brings visions of water, roots, or drifting light. Some dream of ancestors speaking through the marsh, others of journeys yet taken. These dreams are not prophetic in the traditional sense, they are reflections of the Hist's memory. Through dreams, the Hist teaches softly, conveying lessons through metaphor rather than command. A dream of rising water may urge caution. A dream of a glowing lizard may symbolize guidance. In this way, the Hist becomes a guardian of the night, whispering through the subconscious. Travelers who spend enough time with Argonians often notice that their presence carries a strange kind of calm. Their quiet movements, their patient listening, their deep understanding of the land all create an atmosphere where even the harshest environment feels gentler. Argonians radiate an unspoken wisdom shaped by centuries of survival and harmony. They know when to move and when to stay still, when to fight and when to vanish beneath the water, when to speak and when silence carries the truer meaning. They are a people shaped not by conquest or ambition, but by adaptation, resilience, and connection to forces older than empires. Black Marsh, through their eyes, is not a hostile land, it is a living companion. The roots, the mud, the insects, the murky rivers, the glowing flora, they are family. Their culture didn't rise in spite of the swamp, it flourished because of it. Every challenge in the marsh became a lesson. Every predator taught caution. Every plant offered either poison or medicine, depending on the hand that gathered it. Life in Black Marsh required perception sharper than blades, patience deeper than lakes, and wisdom older than the roots themselves. The Argonians learned these lessons well, and so the Argonians walk through their world with quiet certainty, understanding that every step carries the weight of ancient memory. Their souls tied to the Hist, their stories carried by the swamp, their lives shaped by land that thinks and remembers. They are not merely inhabitants of Black Marsh. They are extensions of it, reflections of its mind, voices of its dreaming roots. Outlanders speak of the Argonians as mysterious, but to the Argonians themselves, mystery is simply the language of the world they belong to, a world that whispers through leaves and water, guiding them gently through the endless song of life.